What's going on, everyone? It's the My Aggie Nation Podcast. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle. Over there, Alex Miller, also with the Eagle. We're here to break down a winding down A&M sports season. There's really not a whole lot going on. We got some track this weekend, but other than that, the big news of the week, Texas A&M, Ross Bjork not extending A&M baseball coach Rob Childress' contract. I know for me, wasn't much of a surprise. Alex, what about you? Did you think that this was a surprise at all to you?
No, I mean, the writing was on the wall. It was pretty obvious coming into the season that if Childress was going to get another year or another contract per se, they were going to have to win big. And unfortunately for the Aggies, they just didn't do it. And, we talked last week about how just the inconsistency really troubled this team. They had some really good pieces. They just were never able to really put it together. They had some bright moments. You think about the win over Texas. You think about the series win over Ole Miss. But a win over Texas and a one series win over a top 15 team, that's not going to be enough when you don't even make the conference tournament. Very, very unceremonious ending to the Rob Childress tenure. Dreary was the word I used Saturday to describe that game against LSU, knowing that A&M's playing for nothing, and that was likely the last game that Childress would coach for the Aggies. Very, very weird feeling at the game. That's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. It seemed a little gloomy or down for sure. I mean, both in the stands and the press box, on the field, they started off with 3 errors in the first inning. I mean, just kind of heads weren't in it, which is a little bit understandable with everything going on. Yeah, I think that, of course, it didn't really come as a surprise because I think there has been kind of a groundswell of the A&M fan base that wanted a refresher, wanted to change things up a little bit. And I don't know if that is quite merited, though. I mean, 13 straight NCAA tournament appearances. I know A&M fans want this A&M baseball program to be a blue blood. In some regards, it's right on the cusp of that. There are some teams that have been to more college World Series in the last recent history, and so it probably puts them right on the cusp. But that being said, I mean, in these situations, there's only a handful of head coaches that have been able to consistently take their teams to the College World Series. And unless you grab one of those elite coaches, it's a whole lot easier to get worse than it is to get better. And I know A&M fans would argue that they have the resources and the facilities and the athletic devotion that they could pull in one of those coaches. And we can get to that a little bit later. But I just think that Rob Childress is a good baseball coach, and he proved it year in and year out that he can be among some of the elite coaches. When you're at a place for 16 years, I think it's maybe just a little bit more of people wanting a new and different toy than just whether you're a good coach or not, which is a little bit unfortunate for him and him and his family in this situation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Rob Childress, excellent guy. I mean, you see all the reaction of his former players, especially. You think about how many guys that have come through the A&M program in the last 16 years. There was nothing but love and thankfulness, not only for what he did for a lot of guys on the field, but for how he developed them as men. And there was a lot of gratitude shown. A lot of these guys, they're not playing baseball anymore, but, maybe their husbands and their fathers, and they attribute the way that Coach Childress poured into them as a reason why they have become the people and the men they are today. And so, it was an exit, but there was a lot of love and thankfulness shown by those who, he touched as players and as coaches. I saw Kirk Sarloos at TCU sent out a tweet saying, Coach Childress and Justin Seeley are two of the greatest people I know. So that goes to show the kind of respect that they have in the baseball world among people outside the A&M program too.
Yeah, for sure. So And the other big thing that I always like to touch on is the fact that the A&M baseball program under Rob Childress was one of the most philanthropic sports teams at A&M. They started off their fall as the first time they all got together doing the paint-a-thon, which is they pick a house that needed um, repairs with maybe someone in an underprivileged community, and completely spruced up that house, painting, doing yard work, doing all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't ever a case of you saw a bunch of guys standing around not wanting to participate. They all got in and dove in head first. You had the versus cancer work where they shaved their heads and donated a whole bunch of money towards pediatric brain cancer, which is that whole foundation. You had Spencer's Park out in right field. He was a big part of getting that put in to dedicated to a young A&M fan who died. And then I always heard from several people that, there's organizations and charities that come to A&M's athletic program saying like, hi, we have this kid that's Make-A-Wish type kid who just said that they wanted to do something with A&M. And I always heard that the baseball program was the first to say, hey, we'll take him. And they did the honorary signings and the, be a baseball player for a day and those kind of things all the time. And so good on Coach Childress to kind of see his platform as something that can really bring about a lot of smiles and good times and good work. And so I always appreciated him for that. Let's look back at the Childressera a little bit. What stands out to you? I know my your overlook on the Childressera might go back a little bit farther than mine, but what do you say as some of the highlights of the Childressera and some of the key games, key moments of his time at the helm of the A&M baseball program?
Yeah, being from College Station, went to a lot of A&M baseball games as a kid. Really got to see the totality of the Rob Childress era. Some of my earliest memories going to games, some of those early years where they played the back-to-back super regionals against Rice. I think he really put A&M on the map getting there year 3, year 4. And then you think about, they won 3 straight Big 12 conference titles, tournament titles in Oklahoma City, which was a pretty significant feat. And then finally breaking through to the College World Series in 2011. I mean, that was something A&M hadn't done in over 10 years. That was what Childress was hired to do, was get A&M back to Omaha. And so, that was a big deal. What was it, 16 inning game in game 3 of the super regional. I mean, how can you not forget that? I mean, my dad had just moved to Fort Worth, I think the year before. And so we went, and just remember standing on the railing, and it's like 2 a.m. I'm sure you were covering the game, Travis, covering TCU at the time. So you were like, man, my deadline is shot.
Yeah.
But I mean, you think about those 2 teams, the 2 years that they played TCU, those were probably the 2 best teams that Childress had, and they didn't get to Omaha.
Right.
You think about the year that they got to Omaha the second time, total surprise, kind of lucked out not having to play North Carolina. That was such an interesting year, and that was the year that I got to cover the baseball team full time. So getting to cover a team that makes it to the College World Series, that was cool for me. I didn't get to go to Omaha, but being there from start to finish throughout most of the season, that was a unique time as a journalist, just getting to cover a team that saw success. And yeah, you think about some of the big players that have come through, whether it was Tyler Naquin or the Michael Waka and Ross Stripling duo. We didn't really get to see the full potential of Asa Lacy, but there were a lot of talented guys that came through A&M under Rob Childress, especially on the mound. I mean, pitching, he was known for being a good pitching coach, and you saw the development of a lot of guys under his watch.
I think that's kind of the thing that stands out to me the most, games and accomplishments aside, is the fact that we would show up every fall, every spring to start working on stories for the next season. And for the most part, you knew that, hey, this is still going to be a pretty loaded starting rotation because they just kind of reloaded at that pitching position, and that's what I think was the key to making his team so successful through the years, and probably was a little bit of why this last team was a little bit shaky. Was it just didn't have that same firepower in the starting rotation. All that being said, that's the thing that mostly stood out for me. Those long games that I was at that game in Fort Worth in 2015. By the time I filed my story and drove back, I was living in Dallas at the time and drove back to Dallas. I actually got donuts that morning because it was already donut stores were already open. Um, but you think back at um, making it to Omaha in 2011. And you do talk about that 2015 and 2016 teams that TCU A&M matchup that happened in Super Regionals 2 years in a row. That should have been an Omaha matchup. That they just didn't get the luck of the draw in that uh, brackets 2 years in a row, because that TCU A&M matchup should have been in Omaha 2 years in a row. And that should have been 2 more years going to Omaha for Rob Childress. And one could argue last year with Asa Lacy and Christian Roa and what they were going to be able to do, that might have been another year in Omaha. And so it's kind of a case, if you look back, there's a lot of success, but there's a lot of the ball just not really bouncing the right way for Childress and his staff. And you got to feel a little bit sorry for him in that regard. The other thing that standing out to me too, that I thought was kind of special, and we plenty of talking about how good of a guy he was the game in 2019 when his daughter was graduating from college in Nebraska, and he handed off the reins to Will Bolt and Justin Seeley, and was up there to see that. And you know, some people might not necessarily think that's the great thing. I thought it was pretty impressive that he would, and I believe they won that game. That he would be able to take off on a day, go be with his family in something important, and come back and take things back up. So that always stood out to me as something impressive, that he put those priorities and was able to, and assembled a staff behind him that was able to take over for a day and make that happen. So those were definitely some things that stood out to me. So it's going to be a little bit of a shorter podcast this week because not a whole lot going on. So we'll kind of wrap things up with this, and that is looking ahead. Who could be some of the options moving forward? I think that probably, from what I had heard and talked to, that A&M probably had been in preliminary talks with Tim Tadlock out there in Lubbock, because we'd heard that there had been a little bit of interest, and those got shut down real quick because Kirby Holcutt wasn't going to lose his second major coach in about a month and a half. So Tim Tadlock's locked up to a lifetime contract out in Lubbock, and so that he will be off the radar. It comes down to probably some Jim Schlossnagle at TCU, or you can McDonald at Louisville, or Tony Vitello at Tennessee. Now in some talks I've had, they said that Vitello isn't interested in the A&M job, that there would be other places he would rather go. And with LSU potentially opening up if Paul Maneri decides to retire after this season, McDonald from Louisville is probably a prime candidate for that job. So it'll be interesting to see what direction A&M goes now. It's the first big hire for Ross Bjork. It might be with also with Jimbo Fisher there and Buzz Williams. This could be the biggest hire of his tenure, depending on how long Ross Bjork is here.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that's interesting to note, reading the Lubbock Avalanche Journal story on Tim Tadlock getting his extension, they kind of go in talking with some tech officials what the preliminary talks with A&M looked like. And, Don Williams said tech officials said A&M's pitch to Tadlock included an annual starting salary at $1.2 million, which is a pretty decent bump up from what Childress was making. So I think the point being is that A&M's big game hunting, and that's where they're starting, and that's what they're hoping to get. And reading some of the players' reactions the other day, JB Moss, one of the standouts at the plate for A&M under Childress, he tweeted, they say every firing is an opportunity to upgrade. And he added Ross Bjork and said, Aggie baseball has some work to do. It's been a hard day for all of us and those who had the privilege to play for Childress. And he ended it saying, we've got big, huge shoes to fill. And so, this, like you said, this is the chance for them to go try and get a chance to get a big name guy, a guy who's been proven in Omaha. That's probably someone that they're looking for. And if you're A&M, you really want to nail down a guy that can take you to the next level, because where you've been has been pretty dang good and pretty dang consistent. And so moving on from a guy like Rob Childress, A&M's going to need to make a move that takes him to the next level. And that's a hard guy to come by. There's not a lot of names out there that can do that.
I don't think that, another name that gets thrown around is East Carolina's Cliff Godwin. I don't think that that's a step. I don't get me wrong. Very successful coach, has done a lot out there at East Carolina. I don't think that that's necessarily a step up from Rob Childress. It could be a change. It could be a different look at things, but I don't think that that's necessarily a step up from Rob Childress. Alex, what would you say? I know you don't necessarily follow national college baseball as closely maybe as I do, but who would you like to see coming in for A&M?
I think the guy that makes the most sense would be TCU's Jim Schlossnagle. I mean, he has Texas ties. He is a proven coach. He's a guy who's been to Omaha consistently and has won. That is what A&M wants in its baseball program. It wants to get to Omaha consistently, but not only get there, they want to win. A&M's only have like one win at the College World Series since the 50s. I mean, that's the bottom line of why Rob Childress is not the coach. It's not that he didn't win enough. He didn't win enough. He didn't win big enough. And so, Schlossnagle's a guy who has done that in a relative comparable setting. He has a very successful program in the Big 12, which may not be as good as the SEC, but it's not that much further down. He understands what it is like to compete against big name programs like A&M, like Texas, how to recruit in this state, how to develop talent. You think about some of the really good players that have come through TCU. They were guys that A&M missed out on. You think about a guy like Lucan Baker, who was an A&M legacy, decided to go to TCU. So, I think if Tim Tadlock is off the board, Jim Schlossnagle is a guy that you should go after. Here's something I want to know too, Travis. With seasons still going on, and if A&M wants to get a guy that is really successful, maybe it's a team that goes to Omaha. Is this kind of a coaching search that would probably play out for a few weeks, timeline-wise, before A&M actually names a new head coach?
Yeah, I think that you would, as they proved here with Tim Tadlock, they're probably making phone calls, but none of that would necessarily get announced until after that team's season has ended. So I wouldn't, unless something leaks out, I wouldn't necessarily expect any kind of announcement for another month or so, because that's you're not going to get a coach that is in the running for stuff already announcing he's going to go somewhere else while they're in the middle of a postseason run. So it's going to be a lot of hurry up to wait.
Probably pretty similar to what happened with Buzz Williams, where they let go of Kennedy right after the SEC tournament, 2-3 week buffer zone before Virginia Tech was knocked out in the Sweet 16. I just felt like that was important to note as far as timeline goes. I guess kind of my final question. Where does the A&M job rank nationally, and what makes it lucrative for the big name coaches to come here?
I think that it is not unlike football is right now. it is probably a high tier 2 program. If you want to talk, and tier 1 being the teams that have been been back to Omaha year in and year out over the last decade. You look at your South Carolinas, your Mississippi States, your LSU's, your you can
Florida
maybe
Navy.
yeah, your Vandy's, some of those might be your tier ones, and A&M is just, it's a very, very, it's elite group of programs that A&M is probably just on the outside of because they haven't had that College World Series pedigree. But as with is the case with any A&M program, pretty much, you're going to have the financial resources, you're going to have the facility resources, and I know people who don't necessarily see the landscape other than A&M don't realize that A&M has a strong commitment towards athletics, and that's not necessarily something that all universities across the country have. Sometimes it's you get as much money as you're going to get, and you can do with that what you can. And so there is a strong pedigree. There is a strong a financial commitment towards athletics at A&M, which would again put them there. They have great facilities. I know a lot of people, if you want to compare them to some of the Mississippi schools and what they've been able to do with their baseball programs, yeah, there probably needs to be a little bit of tweaking, but A&M still has fantastic baseball facilities, and with a little bit of room to grow, and make those a little bit more impressive. And talking with some national people, they've said that when you look at like a Mississippi State that has 10,000 people in the stands, when you look at some of these other programs, there's no reason why A&M can't necessarily follow suit with that as well, because they're a lot closer to Houston, major metropolitan areas. They have that kind of alumni base and following, and it is a baseball kind of happy crowd that comes to A&M and follows out. So I think that there is a lot of room for growth, even for a program that is pretty near the top, and that's probably pretty appealing for some coaches out there. So it would rank pretty high. I think that it has it's probably high tier 2 with the ability to easily break into that top tier 1 status that I've invented myself. Um, to go in there. So yeah, following up, I do think that probably if you look at who is out there, Jim Schlossnagle is the right move for A&M. We'll just see what Ross Bjork has up his sleeve and what he's thinking about the whole situation.
For sure. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the coaching search plays out. And Travis, I'm sure you'll be all on top of it as this continues to unfold as our handy, trusted A&M baseball reporter.
You know it. You know it. Real quick thing to mention, got NCAA West Regional track action at E.B. Cushing Stadium this week. Probably not going to be as exciting as the SEC were, because the goal in this is just to make sure you get a qualifying time to go do the real thing in Eugene, I believe next week. So you might see Tyra Gittens do one long jump, get something really great, and pass on her last two. But still, a lot of good action. You got freshman Devon Chain, you've got Brandon Miller, you got Ating Mo, all freshmen getting their first taste at some of this NCAA stuff to see how they are able to do. It's going to be exciting. So go out over there to E.B. Cushing Stadium if you want to get a little bit more track action in your life, or traction, if you will.
There you go. And follow Travis's coverage at theeagle.com.
There you go.
Travis, I think that's all we got.
I think it is. So for Alex Miller, I'm Travis Brown. This is the My Aggie Nation podcast. We'll see you next week.